Appreciate you streaming in here on a Football Monday on Birds 365. McMullen and McDonald, joined by our buddy, Tommy Lawlor from Eagles Blitz, longtime Eagles reporter, who I've been reading everything he's been writing this week. Busy week for the Philadelphia Eagles, so a lot to take apart and then try and put back together. Howie Roseman's been doing it since Monday at 12 noon. Tommy, and two more additions / subtractions yesterday with Isaac Seumalo and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson both going elsewhere. Before we pick them apart individually, what would you say you would grade Howie's moves as 1 week into free agency between an A+ and an F?
I think a B+ would be a fair grade, because you have to take into account the restrictions he's got in terms of the salary cap.
Yep.
It's not a question of did he add the right players, did he go out and bring a bunch of talent in. He had already built a pretty good team, so the key pieces are in place. What he wanted to do is try to limit how many departures he had. He's done a fantastic job of that, and then find some outside talent to bring in. And he's taken, he's made a couple of moves that have potential there. We kind of have to see what they do. Some people will give him an A+ and say he's done a fantastic job. Some people might be a little more disappointed if he didn't get more of a sure thing at running back, that maybe if you don't like his choice at quarterback. But overall, I think given the constraints, I think he's done a very good job.
Yeah, and I think added in, Tommy, he doesn't want to affect the potential compensatory picks in 2024, and the Eagles are more than likely going to get the maximum of 4 added to that. So, it's always about more than 1 year with Howie, and this is an indication of that as well, what he's doing in free agency. But, to me, it was the reason why I'm not upset, and a lot of fans are upset, but, most of this, the Eagles projected to happen. I mean, they knew they were going to lose Javon. They knew they were going to lose Isaac. I don't think they wanted Miles back, to be honest, or at least Howie didn't. Maybe Nick did, but maybe a little bit of a disconnect there. And the defensive backfield, I think the assumption was they'd get 2 back and lose 1. Where Howie is good, and I saw you in the green room, and I always say, is contingencies. And he got 2, just not the 2 we expected.
Right.
So, from this standpoint, I think it's been pretty good. I like your B+ grade. I to those jumping off buildings, what do you say to that?
Listen, the Eagles right now, who's a better team in the NFC?
Yeah.
The Niners, obviously they upgraded with Hargrave. They lost a couple of other pieces off their defensive line. They still have uncertainty at quarterback. They didn't have a great offensive line. I should be good offensive line. And so they're a good team, but I don't know that anybody is clearly better than the Eagles right now. So the key piece is that Howie drafted Jalen Hurts. He drafted Jordan Mailata. Obviously, having older guys like Kelsey and Lane Johnson, they still have the best offensive line in football, even when you put Jurgens in place of Seumalo. I still say that's the best offensive line in football. They still have the best pass rushing duo in Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick. They have arguably the best pair of cover corners. This is still a very good roster. The only reason I guess I would go down to the B+ for Howie, the one concern you have is older players. And you always want to, you're exactly right. Roster building is never about just right now. It's about now, next year, the year after. You always think in terms of 1 to 3 year windows, and having all these older guys back, it's a little bit of a concern. That's a fair argument against it. The one thing I would say is that they are bringing guys back that are still playing at a high level, and they're paying them reasonable money. They didn't go out and throw huge dollars. Like Fletcher Cox took a $4 million pay cut to stick around, right?
Yeah.
And they obviously didn't give big money to Darius Slay. They kind of called his bluff and said, he wanted big money. They said, go test the market.
Yeah.
He went and looked at the
By
market.
the way,
there wasn't big money there.
It's telling, Tommy, that contract is not out yet. That tells you all you need to know about.
Listen, I think all the players are finding out. Certainly, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is the biggest example. They're finding out this is just not a good year to be a free agent. And the salary cap is an odd thing for those of us that are not legal experts, contract experts, and financial experts. And the salary cap kind of flatlining during the pandemic because revenues went down. All of a sudden, teams had to do some strange things, and so you see a lot of the league. I swear, it felt like 20 teams had to make restructures to get under the cap this year. And when you do all that, you're just not going to have as much money to spend as you want. The Falcons had a bunch of money to spend. The Panthers
Bears,
had some money,
yeah.
but not a lot. And so you know what it's like. If you have 3 or 4 suitors and that's it, then they're just not going to throw huge money at you. And look at the safeties. Jordan Poyer re-signed with Buffalo. Didn't get huge money from them.
Yeah.
No safety market aside from Jesse Bates has gotten big money. The big money just isn't there. It's nothing against Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. It's nothing against whoever else has moved around. There's just not money to be had. Next year, I think teams will be in a much healthier situation, and the salary cap will go up another few $1 million, so there will be better opportunities. It'll be a better market.
John and I were just discussing before we punch up, Tommy, that it is March 20th. And the Eagles don't play their first game until the second Sunday in September. So a lot can happen. A lot of additions can come in. There'll be some subtractions as well. But that's what football fans do. That's what we do here on Birds 365. We analyze today, and then we adjust as we go. Contingencies, what does change? But you could at any time say, well, here's where I think they've got an issue. Here's where I think they've got a hole. Here's where I think they got a weakness. Here would be mine for the Eagles today, knowing full well they got months to address it. How good a tackling team is this going to be? I fear that losing TJ Edwards, Marcus Epps was a pretty short tackler. They've lost 2 pretty damn good tacklers from their defense this past year. Hargrave was as much a penetration guy, but wasn't terrible against the run. This team right now doesn't look like a good tackling team to me. Is that a legit concern for you?
I don't know that specifically. That's not what I would focus on. The hole at linebacker, I project Nakobe Dean to the weak side spot. So in my mind, middle linebacker is wide open. The Eagles might feel differently, but that's where they played Nakobe last year, was more on the weak side. So I'm curious what they do there. And when you talk about the defense up the middle, whether it's basketball, baseball, football, defense up the middle is crucial. When you've got Hargrave out, you've got TJ Edwards out, and you got Epps and Gardner-Johnson out. So the middle of your defense is weak, and it's not just tackling to me, but it's kind of everything. Hargrave pass rush, Edwards pass coverage, and the safety's ability to cover and tackle. So the middle of your defense is a little bit weak, and we're going to project Reed Blankenship for one of the starting safety positions. Okay, you're all right there. They've got to make a move at middle linebacker unless they think Christian Ellis is worth starting, which that would shock us all pretty much. And I think that Milton Williams could replace Javon Hargrave, but it's not ideal. You at least want some good competition for him there. And so the defense has question marks. Absolutely. Listen, the defense, as good as it was last year, they got lit up in the Super Bowl, right? We all remember that, unfortunately.
Second half, yeah.
So they have got to figure some things out. One of the things I'm curious about, I'd love to talk to Nick Sirianni with some sodium pentothal, so I got honest answers, and find out what lessons did you learn in the Super Bowl? How is this team going to be different? And obviously they didn't want to pay TJ Edwards $6.5 million. Did they see in the Super Bowl he's not the guy that you want on the field against Patrick Mahomes? Or did they just say we couldn't pay that much to a linebacker there? We've got to make budgetary cuts, and that's just one where we can't spend that much money. I don't know. I'd love to find that out.
Yeah, linebacker's interesting to me because I look at it. Here's how I look at it, Tommy. I think it's telling that the market for TJ Edwards came down to Chicago and the New York Giants, from what I was told. And Chicago has Ian Cunningham, and the New York Giants have Brandon Brown, and they're both personnel guys here in Philadelphia, assistant GMs, and they know TJ very well. They were part of bringing TJ in to the building in South Philadelphia. So, and this is a little bit of a leap, and I'll find this out eventually at some point when we get to talk to Howie. But that tells me that Howie is behind this, and Jody used the term "jag," just a guy. All the fans when they lose a player, oh, he was just a guy. He was just a guy. Well, no, TJ wasn't just a guy. Corey Nelson was just a guy. Nate Gary was just a guy. LJ Fort, Eric Wilson wasn't even a guy. They missed on a lot of this sort of budget shopping for linebackers over the years. And the fact that Ian and Brandon were gung-ho on TJ Edwards tells me not everybody in that building devalues linebacker, but I know one guy who does. And TJ Edwards and I'll throw Kaiser White in there as well. Kaiser was just, a solid, dependable player. Nothing more, nothing less. He is nothing less. And we've seen a lot less. That's one I'm a little concerned about. Your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, Chicago and New York had awful linebacker play for parts of last year. So TJ Edwards, he's the Giants especially. There's a reason they played so much dime defense. Their linebackers were horrific. And if you remember in the playoff game, they had started to play linebackers more, and Jalen Smith was just absolute garbage in that game. So they were desperate for linebacker help. And they eventually went and signed Bobby Okereke from the Colts. The Bears obviously needed linebacker help. They went and brought in two guys. They brought in the Edmonds from Buffalo, paid him huge money.
Yeah.
So they felt like they needed to put in a lot of.
And it's ironic because they traded Roquan Smith. That's
Right,
the other part of the equation.
So those teams really felt like linebacker was something that had to be addressed, and were willing to devote resources to it. It is interesting. So I'm a little curious what's going on. Like, so the Kansas City Chiefs, right? You might remember them. They exist. They have Willie Gay, and then they have Bolton is their starting linebacker last year.
He's more than just a guy.
And they spent last year a mid-round pick on a guy named Leo Chenal, and then they added Drew Tranquil as a free agent this year. So that gives them 4 guys that are capable of being starting linebackers on a defense that plays 2 linebackers most of the time. Maybe somebody there is going to get traded or cut, because that's a lot of linebackers and a lot of salary, a lot of resources to a position that they don't need those 4 guys. So I'm curious what's going to happen there. So this is where Howie and his staff, they study the league, and they know who's got a roster surplus, and they know the market isn't great right now. There's just not a lot out there. So maybe they know they could make a deal with the Chiefs, or maybe there's somebody else they feel is going to have an available linebacker in a trade.
If the Chiefs want to give up Nick Bolton, I'd certainly put the call in if I were Howie Roseman. He's a damn good player.
I don't think they would do that, but the one thing you do have to wonder about is these teams, as they have to plan for the salary cap. You sometimes you sit there and think, can we afford to keep him? You're almost punished for having too many good players, right? Because you just can't keep them. Also, do you let them walk in free agency, or do you trade them before you get to that point? No, so it'll be interesting to see what the Chiefs do.
That's what's happened to the Eagles here. They've lost some good players because the salary cap just didn't allow them to keep the entire band together again. All right, here's one question I need your opinion on, because I'm just a little scared. Not mega scared, but I'm a little scared. It seems that people are just plugging Juergens in at the right tackle, not only as the starter, but a starter who's going to be good and get the job done, and maybe be more than just a guy like some say Isaac Seumalo was.
Well, he's playing between 2 Hall of Famers, Joe.
Okay, so if that's the case, Tommy, do we just go, all right, Juergens, go ahead, you're in, and not even give it another thought? Or are we a little spoiled because 2 years ago, the guy they drafted to replace Jason Kelce was Dickerson? Oh, shoot, maybe we got to use him a little bit at guard. 2 years later, he's an all-pro guard, and the transition was seamless. Are we banking a little too much on that on Juergens? Are we putting a little too much on if Jeff Stoutland says it'll work, of course it'll work, because it's Stoutland University, and he gets everything done. Are we over-assuming to just say, well, you move a guy who's played center his whole life to guard, and he'll fit in seamlessly?
There's risk in the move. There's no question. Anytime you put a player in a position he's never played before, and he's obviously, since he's come to the NFL, he's played it in practice a little bit, I'm sure. The Eagles firmly believe in moving guys around and having them ready at multiple positions. So I'm sure he's done it at the NFL level. Now he's not done it in a game, and that's a huge difference. There's a risk always, and football is a constant series of projections. Isaac Seumalo, when they made him a starter in 2017, he was awful against the Chiefs in 2017, got benched, lost his job. If you remember in 2018, he had a game against the Falcons where Grady Jarrett ate his lunch and it was just terrible, right?
Yeah.
So listen, Isaac Seumalo is an above average player. He's a good player, right? He was also, if we're being honest, he was the fifth of the 5 starting offensive linemen last year. That's not an insult to him. That just tells you how good Mailata, Johnson, Kelsey, and Dickerson were, that he was the weakest of the bunch. He's still an above average player. So you're replacing the weakest player with a new player. Will Juergens be as good as Seumalo? In some ways he won't. There's going to be some things Seumalo is better at. Seumalo was fantastic on double teams and getting movement in the run game. I'm sure Juergens is going to have some issues there because he's not played guard. He's not had to move double teams with a tackle. And so there's going to be some learning there. In terms of movement, blocking on a run, he's going to be better than Seumalo because he's a better athlete. So there's going to be some give and some take. But listen, they projected Andre Dillard to be their left tackle of the future a few years back, and he only started a handful of games at left tackle and was a mediocre player in those games. So even with Jeff Dillard, even with Jeff Stoutland, even with high picks, even with college pedigree, there's a risk in all moves. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point with Isaac. Bench for Stephen Wisniewski. Sort of yo-yoing back and forth earlier in his career. But that's the point. Jody knows I'd like to use. Jim Schwartz told me startup costs with young players. Startup costs. You're going to have a ramp-up period. They might be better 2 years down the road than what you have, but you're going to have some issues with younger players. And that's, I mean, if you look at Isaac early in his career versus late, and I would disagree with you, Tommy. He was the Eagles' third best offensive lineman last year. He should have went to the Pro Bowl. Landon should have been the alternate. Long term, I'd rather have Landon. Landon's going to be a great player. Jordan, only because Jordan was hurt with the shoulder, and he would tell you himself he didn't play like himself. Now, when it got to the playoffs and he was healthier, he played like Jordan Mailata. So, the end of the season, he was playing at a great level. But he would say he played terribly as he fought through that injury. He had a great season, Isaac Seumalo. Part of it was playing next to Kelsey and playing in between Kelsey and Johnson, but those guys love him. Those guys swear by him. Stoutland swears by him. And I say all this knowing the Eagles were going to lose him, but I think the assumption that Cam Juergens is going to step in and play at that level right away, I think that is very, very unlikely, Tommy.
What can I say? There's a risk every year. There's a risk in bringing guys back. We see guys that decline, so there's no guarantee from 1 year to the next that you're going to get the same level of play out of a person. So there's a risk in everything you do. So, really, when you're talking about building a roster, running a football team, it's about risk management. Seumalo probably is going to be a good player for the next couple of years. You're right. He had the best football of his career in 2022. He was an outstanding right guard. Juergens is going to be worse in some ways, better in some ways. Overall, it's going to be a step back, but I don't think it's going to be a significant step back. And again, part of the point is you had to take that step back. You couldn't afford to bring back Seumalo. So it's not a question of Seumalo versus Juergens. It's a question of $8 million versus $1 million. And if you bring back Seumalo, then you're like, okay, look, we can have him, but we can't have Darius Slay, or we can't have James Bradberry. So, it's like when you're young and you're grocery shopping and you don't have much money in your hand.
Yeah.
You go into the store with $20 and you say, well, I got to buy a case of beer, so that's $10. So then
I think you're 100%
I'm not eating
right.
steak. So let me go buy some fish sticks and a bottle of ketchup, and we'll have I'm covered for a week.
Ramen
Right?
noodles. Come on, Tommy.
Yeah,
if you got
ramen.
that case of beer, you gotta chase it down with some ramen noodles.
No, I
You
think
know what I'm saying, right?
I
Exactly.
think you're 100% right, Tommy. I was speaking more to the fans who thought he was just a guy, and that assumption. Look, Isaac was one of the players how he knew he was going to lose. He was one of those guys. So you're 100% right about why he's not back. But the assumption that he's going to be easy to replace, that's kind of what I'm talking about, at least short term, and more to the fans than you, because they think, as soon as a guy leaves, oh, yeah, that's just a guy. We'll replace him, no hiccups. And that's why I bring up the Eric Wilsons of the world when I talk about TJ Edwards, Jack Driscoll. Jack was really solid playing at right guard in 2021. But he wasn't Isaac. It was a difficult position he had to play because of injuries, all the movement. It's not as easy as I think most fans think.
You're exactly right, and there's no question. Isaac's a good player. The Eagles lost a good player. You hate to do that, right? That's part of the fun of the NFL, though, is the uncertainty. Because every now and then you lose a guy, you plug somebody in, and he turned out to be even better. That's where you find out you got a special player, and we don't know if Juergens is going to be that way. Juergens could turn out to be the best guard that we've seen.
Well, that's true. It worked with Landon. Landon was, Landon struggled at right guard. Remember, it was Brandon Brooks got hurt first, and Landon had to play right guard, and he wasn't very good early on at right guard. And then Isaac got hurt with the Liz Frank, and they moved Landon to left guard, and they put Jack Driscoll in at right guard, and Landon really took off by the second half of the season. So, maybe the same thing happens with Cam Juergens. It's possible.
Sure.
It happened with Landon Dickerson.
But then, like I say, we know there's going to be some guys that they projected as replacements. And we know that not all of them are going to work out. History tells you somebody's going to fall on their face, whether it's Reed Blankenship, whether it's Milton Williams, whether it's Cam Juergens, whether it's running back. Somebody's going to be disappointing. That's just reality, right?
Yeah.
All right, Tommy, I did read in the Dallas Morning News that with the addition of Stephon Gilmore, the Dallas Cowboys have the best duo of cornerbacks in the National Football League. Some people in Philadelphia might disagree. Diggs and Gilmore against Bradberry and Slay. Which is the best corner duo?
I'm going to go with Bradberry and Slay because I haven't seen Gilmore and Diggs play together once.
That's true.
And if we're talking about individual talent, well, Gilmore's got a great resume. There's no question. But let's see what he does in that defense. Let's see what he does on that team. And then we'll have that discussion. And if they're better, God bless them, we'll say, hey, they're better. But we've seen Bradberry and Slay. We know the way they complement each other. We know they've looked in the scheme. They've played at a high level. And so for me, I'm going to stick with them. That's what makes football fun is seeing the changes in the rosters and getting ready to see these guys play for their new team. So Dallas thinks they're going to be a better team. We'll see. I'm going to be interested to see what they do.
At Lawlor NFL, follow Tommy there. Eagles Blitz, IGGLES Blitz.com. You can read them there. Scoutnotebook.com as well. Does a tremendous job. I'll continue down. That was interesting. I'll continue down the Cowboys route. To me, it's not about, okay, who's better? They're both really good. Both duos are really good. The Cowboys got better. That was a big problem for them last year, that second cornerback spot. And all of a sudden, you have Gilmore with Trayvon Diggs. They get Brandon Cooks, who's traded for the 77th time, but he's still a good player. It's the weirdest thing in the world. The guy gets traded all the time. But he's still a good player. All of a sudden, you have Brandon Cooks with CD Lamb. It's only a week. It's only March 20th in free agency. Have the Cowboys closed the gap on the Eagles, Tommy?
I think that's a fair thing to say in terms of the roster. I think the Cowboys have a fatal flaw, and that's Mike McCarthy, right? He's talking about wanting to run the football, to work the clock, to rest his defense, and that's awesome if it's 1997. This is 2023. we just saw the Eagles playing a Super Bowl, and if you're, he could say, well, listen, if the defense was rested, we don't give up 38 points to Kansas City. Well, they would have given up 31 or 28. They just wouldn't have scored 35 that the Eagles did. So I just think with Mike McCarthy there, you've got a bit of a fatal flaw. Now, they did cut, Zeke Elliott. So I'm curious what they do at running back, because Tony Pollard has not been a guy that you could feed the ball 300 times to. So they're going to make some move at running back. Maybe in the draft, it's a deep class. Maybe they bring Zeke back. There's been talk about that. So we'll see what they do there. But listen, they've got a ton of talent. Dallas has talent every year. They really do. They just always seem to have something that keeps them from taking that next step and winning the big games in the playoffs. And with Mike McCarthy as coach, if I was a Cowboys fan, I wouldn't have a lot of confidence in that, especially when he's espousing ideas that seem dated by today's standards.
No, we've got 6 weeks to go before the draft, and surely we're going to have you back here with us prior to the draft. But as of today, and again, same like the question I asked you before, we can rank the Eagles today and look at what questions they would have and see where the solutions are out there. The 10th pick in the draft is a potential problem solver, a guy who you have to believe is going to be of a level of talent that you can plug him in and play. But you also want to take the best available talent. And if it means sitting on a guy for the year, which the Eagles proved they would do just this past year with their first 3 draft picks, all being guys that, yeah, we don't need to play them. When we need them, we'll need them. And then we'll plug them in. And it's going to be year 2. But number 10 is higher than where the Eagles drafted last year. What do you think Howie's looking at right now? Certainly has the right to change his mind over the next 6 weeks. Is it a player? Is it a positional thing? Assuming the Eagles stay at 10, which is a pretty big assumption because Howie loves to move. What do you think they're looking at with their first pick in the draft come 6 weeks from now?
When you're in the top 10, you don't think position so much as player. You want to find the best possible player because that player could be with you. You obviously see Lane Johnson's here and been here for a decade, and Fletcher Cox been here for more than a decade. Brandon Graham, those guys were all top 10 picks, and they've been here for our top 15 picks. They've been here for a long time. So you don't want to think just about 1 year. I'm sure in their fantasy world, Peter Skoronski, the offensive lineman for Northwestern, if he fell to pick 10, they would love that because they could draft him. He could be your right tackle in the future, or you could put him in at right guard should Juergens get injured or have issues, and he could play right guard. He's got that kind of capability. One of the guys that he compares favorably to, I think, is Zach Martin from Dallas. So he's a guy that I think can be an outstanding offensive tackle. I think could be an outstanding offensive guard. So I'm sure that's something they're interested in. The biggest mystery for people in the draft world right now is Jalen Carter, the defensive lineman from Georgia. He is the player that if you ask me a month ago, who is the one player I covet in the entire draft, is Jalen Carter. No question. Go get him, plug him in as your defensive tackle. And he's a guy that he's the best player in the entire draft. With the Eagles at 10, I thought they had no chance to get him. Well, he was involved in a situation where a teammate died in a fatal car crash, and it turns out that Jalen Carter was racing with him in his car, left the scene of the incident, and then was arrested by police later for his involvement in the situation. No serious charges, he's no felonies, but something that's misdemeanor type stuff that he's going to have to deal with. He showed up at the combine, didn't work out at the combine. Then at his pro day, showed up 9 pounds overweight, and then had a bad showing in the positional drills he did. It got so winded he couldn't finish them. So he has sent red flags to NFL teams of, I am definitely not going to go in the top 3 or 4, but now you sit there and say, if you're the Eagles and he's on the board at 10, do you take him, or is he showing you I can't be trusted and I'm not a player you should want? So that's one I guarantee you that Howie's sitting there thinking about him. He's talking to all his draft people. I guarantee you Big Dom is getting in on these talks.
Yeah, that's Big Dom's job, baby.
Absolutely. Because we know certain things that are in the public, but Big Dom does that again, finds out what's behind there. Because they found out that he'd gotten out of other speeding tickets. I think he had been doing 89 and a 45 when a cop pulled him over once.
Yeah.
And
evidently that was a big problem with the whole team down there. So,
But,
is
the Scots are Georgia
They're going to
fans.
be
They
the
let the
Eagles
guys
going
get
to be
away with
counting
stuff.
on two guys out of that team to fill in big roles on their defense this year. Are you telling me that Nakobe Dean and Jordan Davis did the speed limit while everybody else was doing triple digits down there in Athens?
Yeah.
Listen, you don't need a team of choir boys, but you need. So Jordan Davis had a great workout at the combine. He did go to the combine and worked out and did things we've never seen before. So that's part
Yes.
of it. Is he handled his business? You could see that's a professional football player. Jalen Carter has sent a message to teams that somebody put on Twitter that, are you going to ignore his game tape for the last 3 or 4 years and focus on what he's done the last month? And the way I said it was, okay, if I've got a Harvard graduate who has graduates with a 4.0 and it comes to a job interview drunk, am I going to hire that guy? Right? He had a great college career, but he showed up for his job interview in an inappropriate fashion. I can't trust him. So with Jalen Carter, you got to make that call. Is what he did, does that make him untrustworthy? With Nakobe Dean, Nakobe passed every test possible. He just didn't have a great workout at the combine because he's not a great athlete. And then he played well as a rookie when he got on the field. Jordan Davis was up and down as a rookie, but he had a great workout at the combine and did well in the pre-draft process. So Jalen Carter had a great career. He just hasn't done well in the pre-draft process. So listen, if he falls to 10, maybe the Eagles take him. And maybe he turns out to be a great player, right? But there are some concerns, and it makes for an interesting discussion.
Tommy, great stuff. As always, we love having you on. Like I said, we're surely going to have you on at least once, if not twice, before the draft. Appreciate you jumping in with us today. EaglesBlitz.com. Check out his website. Always has good Eagle insight and opinion. Thanks for sharing with us today.
Great to talk to you guys, and look forward to having some more moves to talk about.
Yes. Well,
we'll have plenty, Tommy. We'll have plenty. They're going to bring in a safety somewhere. They're going to find a safety and a linebacker. Got to find a linebacker somewhere.
Don't think it'll be this week. Couple things on what Tommy just wrapped up with. Judging a guy by the biggest, worst day of his life and maybe the biggest mistake of his life. Yeah, Laramie Tunsil has been able to get over that. You'll remember 2016 with the draft mask fiasco that cost him how many slots in the draft that year. This weekend, he signed the biggest contract ever for a tackle in the National Football League, $25 million per. So you can get over. You can make a major mistake. It can cost you at the time, but then if your talent is what it is over time, you'll be able to put that in your rearview mirror. I'm not saying it's Jalen Carter. He might just be a bad dude who is not committed, just a physical freak that is never going to put the time and effort in. Surely Tunsil did, but there's also examples of guys who can get past having the worst day of their life.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing with the draft, Jody. There are two categories that we don't know enough about, people outside the process. No matter how much research, you don't know the medicals and you don't know the off the field stuff, at least as well as the teams get to do it. And that's where Dom DeSandro is a big part of this, and that's his job, and that's why he's the assistant to Howie Roseman. One thing I will say about Howie, and I believe him here, with all the experience, he's never drafting for need again. So forget about needs. He's going to draft the best player. Now, there's certain spots he's not going to draft a quarterback. So if the 10th best player on their board is a quarterback and it's their turn, they're not going to take a quarterback. So there are certain exceptions, but he said pretty strongly in front of the camera, behind the camera, that, look, he's got in trouble in the past when he's gone for need more than just who the best player is, just who the best player you believe in. And I don't think he's doing that anymore. I think he's learned from those mistakes. So whomever, and we've seen it last year with Cam Jurgens. We saw it with Landon Dickerson the year before, second round picks, but very similar. Even to Kobe Dean in the third round, where that's tremendous value when he fell. He's not a need guy.
Right. The best of all worlds is when you both fill a need and you take the best available player on the board. Sometimes those two things magically come together, like Devontae Smith just 2 years ago. The Eagles had a need at wide receiver, and he was the best available, and they moved up to get him because they knew they were in a win-win situation. Getting in a player that would be the biggest value at that point.
The context, though, the context, people forget the context. All right, the Eagles started at 6, right? They went down to 12 that year, and they went back up to 10. Here's what happened. They wanted J.C. Horn or Patrick Surtain, and they thought one of them would get to 12, which is the reason they went down. They actually like Jalen Waddle as well. And if they would have stayed at 6, they probably would have taken Jalen Waddle. They had this group of 5 players they wanted. Devontae was the 5th of those 5 players. All of them were off the board, and they were sitting there at 12 thinking the Giants were going to take them at 11, and that's why they went back up to 10. And it's worked out great. Again, contingencies with Howie Roseman. But it's interesting, they wanted the corner that year. And then we would dispose of this other narrative, like the Eagles never take a corner in the first round. Oh, they wanted one. They wanted one badly.
They were gearing to, exactly right.
So, a lot of these narratives get, lost in the context and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that was an interesting year, and it worked out.
And, oh, by the way, when you're coming off a 4-11-1 season, guess what? You got a lot of needs. You got holes that you need to plug immediately, and they added at both corner and wide receiver. So they had some flexibility, but you're right. 4 out of the 5 had come off the board, and they said, we better make sure we get the 5th. That's why they moved back up to get Devontae Smith. I'm John McMullen. I'm Jody McDonald. I do want to continue the conversation about the main competition in the division. Sorry to you Giants and Redskin fans or Commander fans out there. Cowboys are still the number 1 competitor to the Eagles, and I think they added 2 good players this weekend at minimal cost. There are 2 different types of costs. One is salary. The other one is draft capital if you got to trade for them. And the Cowboys had to trade for 2 guys, but they got 2 pretty darn good, talented veteran players who I think should help them. I want to go a little bit further with that with Johnny Mac next. Johnny Mac here with you on Birds 365.